Hello and welcome to Writing Escapades. My name is David Rawding. I'm an author, former English professor, YouTuber, podcaster. I wear a lot of hats. Right now I'm wearing my winter hat because it's December and I live in New England and it's getting cold. It's starting to feel like winter. So the winter is a good time for me because I get to do a lot of writing, editing, and that kind of stuff. So on this episode, I want to talk to you guys about editing a second draft. I've talked about first drafts before, but now I'm going to talk about what it's like to work on your second draft of a novel. Now, I've talked about rough drafts or first drafts on this channel before, but this time we're going to get into what you do when you finish that rough draft, when you finish that first draft, and that is to start a second draft. I'm actually currently working on a second draft of a book, so this topic actually seemed pretty appropriate to me for where I'm at right now. Okay, let's just say you've just finished your first draft. Nice. That's awesome. Good work. It's a lot, I know. So maybe you'll set it aside for a little bit and, let it sit for a little while. And then could be weeks, could be months. I don't know how long it works for you, but for me, I like to let the story sit for at least a month or two before I dive back in. You'll dive back in with fresh eyes. Okay, so the first thing I would suggest is that you give your manuscript, your first draft, a reread. So get a notepad, some pen, some paper, however you like to take notes, and reread your first draft. This is after it sat for a little while. You pulled it back out of the drawer, you're taking a look at it, you're giving it a reread, and as you reread, look for things, look for big picture problems and issues. These might have already been pointed out to you by members of your writing group, if you have a writing group, or potentially beta readers. You could have had a beta reader or a friend or family or whoever you have read your story. They may have already pointed out some things that they want to see fleshed out a little bit more in draft number 2. So for example, using my own example, my second draft, the biggest issue that the guys in my writing group and that I kind of know that I need to work on in the second draft is the marriage relationship between the main 2 points of view. So I've got a man and a woman, they're married, and their relationship is actually somewhat dysfunctional. And that dysfunction is actually what motivates these 2 characters to do what they do in the story. So I've kind of lightly brushed on this subject with their relationship, but it didn't really become clear to me that that was going to be as big of a deal until later down the line, where I realized the story really does get pulled into that orbit, because their relationship, whether it works, whether it doesn't work, how they navigate their own marriage is actually it's the glue, it's the spine. It's really what propels the story, because the characters are gonna, be motivated to, either fix a relationship or walk away from the relationship or just deal with it. And that's kind of what is the major crux. It's the major issue of the story. There's a lot of other things that happen in the story that have nothing to do with that, but this is the stuff that really motivates these characters to get out of bed in the morning, to move, to run, to walk away, to fight, all these kind of things. So in my second draft, I'm looking for points where I can expose their relationship. Maybe I'll add an extra fight or something like that. Maybe I'll add a flashback to a good time or to a bad time. I'll try to show the reader through character body language or some internal dialogue or even normal dialogue what their relationship is. Is it working? Is it not working? What works about it? What doesn't? So it's important to know that rough drafts are kind of like skeletons. They're bones. They have a structure, but they need a lot of fleshing out. So that's the kind of stuff you want to do. You want to look for the ideas that you want to flesh out when you began your first draft. So maybe towards the end of the book, you have a big event or a big twist that you really didn't set up because you just didn't know about it until you wrote it in that first draft. That's okay. That's fine. Now, in a second draft, that's a great place to help set up that finale, help set up that big event, that twist. You do that as you're going through on that second draft. Set it up early, keep kind of ringing that bell so the reader is reminded about it. And that way, when it actually happens, it won't seem like it's too contrived. Basically, look for opportunities to foreshadow what's to come and pepper those little hints throughout the story to keep it in the reader's mind. That's the kind of stuff you do in a second draft. How do you know what's working and how do you know what's not working? Well, as I mentioned, writing groups, beta readers, those are the types of people that can give you that feedback. I mean, you can also kind of self-edit and look through and find what you can find, but if you can get another pair of eyes on it, you know, just somebody who's a reader or an editor or anybody that's literary at all, yeah, that's the best you can do because you can get feedback and they can tell you what they like, what they don't like, what's working, what's not working. That's the best way to do it. So often for me, I actually do a fair bit of actual writing in a second draft. New chapters, new point of views, new dreams, new flashbacks, new side stories. I'm often surprised about how much writing I actually do while I'm editing. It's kind of the fun part for me. So in a second draft, how important is grammar and punctuation? So for me, I clean it up a bit and I fix the spelling and grammar and punctuation more so as a compulsion in a second draft, if that makes any sense. I'll be reading through and spot an error and fix it and keep moving. I find that in later drafts, I can actually spend the time to kind of punch up that dialogue or action beats or beef up some descriptions and settings. And a lot of the time, that's when I rewrite sentences, which ends up having me go through and clean up the punctuation and grammar. So I'll do that a lot more in later drafts, but I still definitely do it in second drafts. I'll definitely read through, and if I see an issue, I fix it. It's just a compulsion. It does help. To go along with working on big picture things, I like to go through and define my characters better in a second draft. I try to describe them better visually. I'll add scars, limps, and certain behaviors. I try to find opportunities to differentiate them from other characters and give them their own personality and quirks. In the second draft, this is a great time to kind of go through and really take those characters and make them three-dimensional. Give them more personality. Now, there really aren't any hard set rules when it comes to what you should be doing in every draft. I mean, everybody writes differently. You could be a pantser, you could be a diamond polisher. It could be that your writing is already so clean in your first draft that punctuation and grammar aren't an issue for you. Good on you. I'm not that way, but good on you. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. But you may have to worry about maybe doing an overhaul on a character or adding a backstory or adding more chapters with a different point of view or maybe losing point of view and then having to rewrite something else. That's the kind of stuff that, you know, really starts to happen in a second draft. You're moving large parts of the book so that it functions. You know, you want to make sure that the arc of the story is there and it's strong and it beats. And I think that second drafts are really important to get that big stuff done. So yeah, in a second draft, this is the time to actually do the research on the stuff that you didn't know about in your first draft. If you wrote something and you said, all right, I'll do the research later. This is the time to do it because you need to be a master of your setting. You need to have the research done on something you don't know about. This is the time to research it and then incorporate it into the writing so that it works, because the story arc, if it doesn't work, if there's problems, if it's not functioning correctly, it's going to just kind of collapse on itself. So you need to make it strong, and you're kind of going through and you're hammering it out, making that iron into steel, because the second draft is the time. It's the time to do the research, to make that setting shine. It's the time to set up those bigger events in your story. You want to go through in that second draft and you want to find areas to really add strength to your cause, add strength to the twists and the reveals, and you need to add some foreshadowing to kind of set that up. It's the time to go through and make those characters shine. What do they really look like? What do they really look like? This is the time to make sure the reader knows. What are their motivations? Really make those come out in the second draft. Maybe you didn't know in your first draft. It's fine. In first drafts, you don't really have to know what you were doing. But in your second draft, you want to go through and you want to do the research, really buff up that writing, shore it up, make it strong, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Yes, I would definitely clean up grammar and punctuation as you go, but I wouldn't make it the main priority of a second draft because you're going to be writing new scenes, you're going to be writing new chapters, you're going to be cutting whole chapters and moving things around. I mean, might get new points of view, you might lose points of view. So if you spend all the time working on editing, you know, all the punctuation and grammar on stuff that you may end up just axing anyway, it's kind of wasted time, right? That's just my opinion. That's how I work and operate. Yeah, so to wrap it up, guys, once you've got that first draft written, set it aside for a while, weeks, months, not too long, but long enough where you can come back at it with fresh eyes. Then give it a reread. Reread that story as if it's brand new. Believe me, it'll feel like you're reading somebody else's story. And you may see stuff you don't like. You may see stuff you were like, hey, my writing's not half bad. I'm awesome. Good on you. It's good to have that. So go through and take notes as you reread your story, and just be sure to know what to work on as you go. The big picture stuff, the big picture items, the problems with the story. Is a conflict not really set up well? Well, you're going to have to work on that. You're going to have to work on setting that conflict up. Is a resolution not really resolved? Well, you got to work on that. That's going to be towards the end of your story. You're going to have to spend more time there. Maybe your characters are kind of two-dimensional and they're flat and they don't have a lot of personality. Punch it up. Give them some witty characteristics. Give them some unique characteristics that help define them and help show the reader who they really are. And just overall, second draft is all about beefing up the story. You've got the bones, you've got the skeleton of the first draft. Second draft, time to add some flesh onto that skeleton. At this point, you want to make this thing look like a human being in this metaphor. But yeah, you're going to keep going through in later drafts. You're going to work on punctuation, grammar, sharpening, everything. But this is where you should really get this thing to start looking like a book. You should be able to read it, and just as a casual reader, by the end of your second draft, be able to read it and be able to start to see it as a story. And that's the kind of stuff you're going to work on in your second draft. And I wish you luck. All right, I've rambled on. I hope you have a great holiday season. And stay warm out there, and happy writing.